kingdom in humans. And the point makes it clear that people who focus primarily on themselves and worldly things are external people. They are earthly not only in body but also in mind. People who focus primarily on things related to heaven and the church are internal people. They are spiritual in both mind and body. They are spiritual in body as well because their actions and words come from the higher mind, which is spiritual, through their lower mind, which is earthly. As people generally know, effects come from our body, while the causes that produce those effects come from our mind. The causes shape every aspect of the effect. It's obvious that the human mind has been divided into this way from the fact that people are able to pretend, to flatter, to be hypocritical, or to play act. They can agree with what someone else is saying and nevertheless view it as ridiculous. They do the former in their lower mind, the latter in their higher one. These things enable us to see how we are to understand the statement that goodwill and good works are two distinct things. Wishing people well and treating them well, that is, that they are formally distinct, like the mind that does the thinking and the willing, and the body through which the mind speaks and acts, in fact, are essentially distinct as well, because the mind itself is divided into an inner region that is spiritual and an outer region that is earthly, as I said above. Therefore, if things we do come from our spiritual mind, they come from wishing others well or goodwill. If, however, they come from an earthly mind, they come from a form of wishing others well that is not genuinely goodwill. It can appear to be goodwill in its outer form and yet not be genuinely goodwill in its inner form. Goodwill that exists in the outer form alone does indeed present and look of goodwill, but lacks its essence. The point could be illustrated by an analogy with seeds in the ground. Every type of seed gives rise to a shoot, but those shoots are either useful or useless, depending upon their species. The same is true for spiritual seeds, that is, for truth in the church that comes from the Word. A body of teaching grows out of its truth. The useful body of teaching is, if it is made out of genuine truths, a useless one if it's made out of truths that have been falsified. The same thing applies to goodwill, that is exercised as a result of wishing our neighbor well, whether we wish them well for our own sake or for the worldly reason, or for the sake of our neighbor in a narrow or broader sense. If we wish our neighbors well for our own sake or for the worldly reason, our goodwill is not genuine. If we wish our neighbors well for their sake, our goodwill is genuine. See many statements that address these topics in the chapter on faith, especially in the discussion showing that goodwill is benevolence towards others, and good works are good actions that result from benevolence, and goodwill and faith are transient and exist only in our minds unless, when an opportunity occurs, they accumulate and the actions have become embodied in them. Goodwill itself is the acting justly and faithfully in our position, in our work, and with people with whom we interact. Goodwill itself is acting justly and faithfully in our position, in our work, because all things we do in this way are useful to the community. Usefulness is goodness, and goodness is in personal sense in our neighbor. And goodness is an impersonal sense in our neighbor, as I have shown above. Our neighbor is not only individual people, but also a community and the country as a whole. For example, if monarchs led the way for their subjects by setting an example of doing good, if they want their people to live by the laws of justice, if they reward people who live that way, if they give all the people the consideration they deserve, if they keep their people safe from harm and invasion, if they act like parents to their countries and take care of the general prosperity of their people, these monarchs have goodwill in their hearts. The things they do are good actions. Priests who teach truths from the Word and use truths to lead to goodness of life, therefore to heaven, are practicing goodwill in a very important way because they are caring for the souls of the people in the church. Judges who make decisions on the basis of justice and law, and not because of bribery or because someone is their friend or relative, are caring for the community and for the individual, for the community, because their decisions influence it, to stay obedient to the law and fearful of breaking it, and for the individual because their decision allows justice to triumph over injustice. Business people who act with honesty and without fraudulence are caring for the neighbor they do business with. So are workers, craftspeople, when they do their work uprightly, honestly, rather than falsely or deceptively. The same goes for everyone else, for the ship captains and sailors, for farm workers and servants. This is goodwill itself because it can be defined as follows. Goodwill is doing good to our neighbor daily and consistently, not only to our neighbor as an individual, but also to neighbor collectively. The only way to do this is through practicing goodness and justice in our position and work and with the people with whom we have interaction, because these are things we do every day. When we're not doing them, they still stay in our minds all the time. We think about them and intend to do them. People who practice goodwill in this way become better and better forms of goodwill. Justice and faithfulness shape their minds, and the practice of goodwill shapes their bodies. Over time, because of their form, they get to the point where everything they want and think about relates to goodwill. In the long run, they become like people mentioned in the Word, who have the law written on their hearts. Such people also take no credit for what they're doing, since they are not thinking about receiving credit for it. They're thinking about their duty. In their view, acting in this way, it is the right thing for citizens to do. Nevertheless, if we are completely incapable of acting on the basis of spiritual justice and faithfulness on our own, we are all inherit from the parents the traits of doing what is good and just for our own sake or for the worldly reason. None of us hereditarily does these things for the sake of goodness and justice. Therefore, only when people worship the Lord and function from the Lord, when they seem to be functioning on their own, do they obtain spiritual goodwill and become saturated with it as a result of constant practice. Many people have justly North Korea threatens to cancel summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un. Of course, they lie right through their teeth, man. They're not going to get rid of their nuclear weapons. Anyway, okay, all right. If love for the heaven happens to be present at all, it's under their other loves, like a slave under a master, like a foot soldier under a commander, like a doorkeeper standing by the door. Acts of kindness related to goodwill consist in giving to the poor and helping the needy, although with prudence. It's important to distinguish between work-related acts of goodwill and incidental acts of kindness. Work-related acts of goodwill means those practices of goodwill that come straight from the goodwill itself, since goodwill itself is a function of the work that we do, as I've shown above. Acts of kindness, however, refer to helpful acts that are done outside of our work. They're called acts of kindness because we are free to do them as we please. And when we do them, the recipients see them as kindness and nothing else. We do them according to the reasons and intentions we have in mind as benefactors. It's common belief that goodwill consists solely of giving to the poor, helping the needy, caring for the widow and orphans, making contributions to build, enhance, endow hospitals, hospices, hostels, orphanages, especially church buildings. Many of these actions, however, are not integral to the exercise of goodwill. They are extensions to it. People who consider goodwill to be good deeds of these kinds cannot help taking credit for them, although people may claim aloud they do not want any credit for their good deeds. Nevertheless, inside them lies the belief that they deserve credit. This is perfectly obvious after death when people like this list the things they have done and demanded salvation as a reward. They are then investigated to find out what origin of their actions had and what quality their actions possess as a result. Whatever origin the actions had, whether they came from arrogance, hunger for fame, a wish to be seen as generous, or from a desire to win friends, or from some merely earthly tendency, or from hypocrisy, they are judged on the basis of that origin, because the quality of the origin lies within the action. Genuine goodwill, however, emanates from people who have become steeped in it through doing work based on justice judgment without the goal of being repaid in accordance to the Lord's words. People of genuine goodwill refer to the donations listed just above, not as goodwill itself, but acts of kindness and also duties, although they're related to goodwill. As in general, as is generally recognized, there are people who do acts of kindness that seem to the world like the very picture of goodwill, with the result that the people believe that they have performed acts of genuine goodwill. They look at their own acts of kindness the way many Catholics look at indulgences that have absolved them of their sin. They believe heaven ought to be granted to them since they are regenerated as a consequence, yet, in fact, they do not consider acts of adultery, hatred, revenge, fraud, or fleshly craving, or whatever kind to be sinful. They indulge in such acts whenever they like, but in that case, their good actions are like paintings of angels and devils at parties together, or like boxes made of lapis lazuli and have poisonous snakes inside of them. It's completely different if people do the same act of kindness but abstain from evils just listed, because those evils are enemies of goodwill. Nevertheless, doing kindness is enriching in many ways, especially giving to the poor and to the people who are begging. By acts like these, young men and women, male and female, servants, and simply people of all kinds are initiated into an exercise of goodwill. These actions are outward habits that help the giver absorb the benefits of goodwill. They are the beginnings of goodwill. They are like fruit, but not yet ripened. For people who afterwards develop proper concepts of goodwill and faith, these habits become like fruit, fully ripe. People like this come to regard the things they used to do from the simplicity of heart as things are now obliged to do. Nowadays, kindness like these are seen as central acts of goodwill that are referred to in the word as good works. The reason for this is that many times in the word, goodwill is characterized by giving to the poor, helping the needy, taking care of widows and orphans, and so forth. But up until now, people have not known that the letter of the word mentions only things that are external and are in fact the outermost aspects of worship. People have not realized that these external things have meanings that are spiritual and internal. On this last point, we see the chapter above, Sacred Scripture. Those passages make it clear that mentions of the poor, needy, widows, orphans in the word do not literally refer to such people. They refer to people who are spiritually poor, needy, and widowed, or orphaned. For the poor, meaning people who have no concept of goodness and truth. See Revelation, Unveiled 209. For widows, meaning people who have been separated from truths and yet long for them. See 764 there, and so on. People are born of compassion and yet do not make their earthly acts of compassion spiritual by doing them out of genuine goodwill, tend to believe that goodwill is giving to any poor person and helping any needy person without first finding out whether the poor or needy person is good or evil. They say that this is not necessary because God notices only the helpful gesture and act of mercy. After death, however, people like this are identified and completely separated from people who have done prudent kindness related to goodwill. The people who have done kindness based on a blind idea of goodwill do just as many kindnesses for the evil as for the good. The evil use the kindness to do evil things and harm people, and in that case, the benefactors share the responsibility for harming good people. Ooh, okay. So, I'm going to stop right there. I guess we better, yeah, that's why I don't like giving to just people out on the street necessarily, unless I know that they're good, and that and that's hard to. How do you know? You don't know that person, And there was one time where I helped a gentleman. I was going to go into a store, and he looked really hungry. He was filthy from head to toe. And as a matter of fact, he didn't have any shoes. And he was really hungry. And I said, well, let me buy you something to eat and drink. And he, as soon as that was all done, he walked over to his friend who had a sign, who was, asking for work. And shared his food with him. So I thought, okay, well, he is a good guy, you know?